Good afternoon and welcome to the POOLBEG PHARMA PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Jeremy Skillington, CEO. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon and thank you. Good evening. Can we say good evening? Actually, can we say Happy New Year to everybody who joins us? I know we're the middle of January, but obviously our first chance of POOLBEG to speak to our investors and would-be investors. We had a very productive week last week at the JP Morgan conference in San Francisco, so it's nice to be back and to give everybody an update on our most recent activities around POLB 001, as you know, our lead program, our lead asset. So as an anchor, I just want to start and remind you how well POOLBEG is positioned for success. We've had a very exciting 2023. I think we've made a lot of progress in our pipeline. We've built out our team. Again, we've started with strength with our chairman, Cathal Friel, Ian O'Connell, CFO, and myself. And again, a lot of experience in the industry, both building and indeed exiting companies. But very happy towards in Q4, bringing on three very experienced new colleagues in John McAvoy, who's heading up legal, Laura Marr, who's going to head up our clinical, and joining us here tonight is David Albert, our Chief Business Officer. And I think the purpose of tonight is to give you an update on 001 around the CRS induced by cancer immunotherapies, recent data we've generated. Again, talk about the clinical requirements and then ultimately the market. And I think there's David has been doing a terrific amount of work with the team to analyze that in greater detail. So again, great to have the AMR team on as we build for the future. I think right now as a company, we're focused on number one, moving our pipeline forward, but obviously as well, looking for near-term revenue generators. Interesting time in the industry. As 2023 has been challenging for most. Again, a good year for POOLBEG, but again, focusing in parallel on partnering discussions, which, as I said, we've been very busy and active on towards the end of last year, and of course at JP Morgan last week. So again, I will remind you of our pipeline, our high-value program 001. We'll speak about in depth tonight, and the most exciting aspect of that of late is its application to cancer immunotherapy in cytokine release syndrome associated with cancer immunotherapy, and we'll talk about that. Also have a program going into the clinic this year, oral GLP-1 agonist. Again, the GLP-1s have been excited in the obesity and diabetes space of late, and we have an oral delivery program going into the clinic. And then lastly, our AI program, very wonderful collaborations to bring us through to having new novel drugs and targets for respiratory infectious diseases. As a reminder, we've got a very strong cash balance, 14.1 million as of the middle of last year. And again, as I said, pivoting towards revenue generation to be wholly independent as well. Apologies for my voice as well, this lingering cold following Christmas. So again, as a snapshot of our pipeline, high-value programs, 001, as I say, we'll talk about tonight. We were positive phase 1B data from our LPS challenge study last year, and more recently, in vivo data confirming, I guess, strengthening our conviction that progressing into cytokine release syndrome is the way to go. And I'll share some data on that later on. But as I say, we're phase 2 ready. We have a pretty robust package for the regulators to review, so moving that ready, and of course partnering ready. Also looking at severe influenza. This is our starting point in respiratory viral infections. We see a great application there for the same product, for the same drug in that space. And say on the back of our LPS challenge study last year, there's great progress and promise. The oral encapsulated GLP-1 as a proof of technology clinical trial will begin and finish this year. So again, these are short trials where we get a lot of human data, ultimately making that available for partnering purposes. And again, progressing through the drug candidates and drug targets identified in our AI collaborations. Other collaborations in the background, other works going on. We have an encapsulation technology collaboration with a NASDAQ listed company that's going quite well, and sent along some samples to them for analysis. And of course, progressing our oral vaccine program, which was funded by the Irish government. So exciting in that regard. But let's focus on 001. It's a phase 2 ready orally delivered P38 MAP kinase inhibitor. Again, we're looking now at the cytokine release syndrome associated with cancer immunotherapies. As Martin Kaiser will talk about, from a clinician standpoint, what's happening in that space and the issues involved and how we could resolve that. But as a reminder, we have phase 2 ready. It's an excellent bioavailability, very strong preclinical package, safe and well tolerated. Everything that you want in a drug, in a molecule, you can check those boxes. Good, strong efficacy in our human phase 1 LPS challenge study. And again, looking at an in vivo model specifically in cytokine release syndrome, we've gotten quite exciting data as well there that I'll talk about. Interestingly, around this industry, patents are critical. We have oncology patents filed last year, which gives us protection, if granted, out to 2043. This new data will actually enhance the robustness and the excitement around these patents, and again, focusing in on CRS. Again, we have granted patents out to 2038 for the use of P38 inhibitors for severe influenza. But focusing in on the cancer immunotherapies, I say this is the next generation of cancer therapies. If you recall, we started with the chemotherapies, progressed forward to small molecules, antibodies. But immuno-oncology is quite recent, but as I said, the most exciting part of the industry where we're actually seeing cures, which is getting both the industry and the healthcare system and the patients very excited. But the challenge with these immunotherapies is when you give them, you develop this cytokine release syndrome, requiring the patients to stay in hospital. So that puts a lot of pressure on the healthcare system to manage these patients as they're in the hospital system. It actually gives a bit of a bottleneck, which kind of doesn't allow new patients to come through because beds are taken up because of this CRS issue. As I say, we see, and this is, we talked previously about treatment of CRS, but now that we have these new patents filed, we can actually talk about prevention. This is something we didn't want to talk about previously, but we can actually be in a position to prevent the onset of cytokine release syndrome, again, allowing the patients to receive their immuno-oncology therapy and then progress through the hospital system a lot quicker. And indeed, being a small molecule and orally available, they can take these drugs home and take it from there. So again, Martin will talk a lot about that and the benefits of our drugs. So very excited about where we are right now from a data standpoint, from an IP standpoint, with recent filings. As I say, we see a great market opportunity, which Dave will talk about later on. As I say, a lot of activity going on in the analysis of that market space. This is the data that recently came out, again, validating the role of inhibiting P38 to reduce cytokine release syndrome. And very briefly on the right-hand side with these graphs, these are a variety of cytokines that are activated in response to this cytokine release syndrome. We have interferon, TNF, interleukins, and MIPs. And what we're seeing here is without any treatment, without any P38. In the red line, we see this dramatic increase of the expression, the release of these cytokines. But once you give POLB 001, in the other colored lines, as I say, we have 3 different doses here, you're seeing this reduction, a reduced expression of these variety of cytokines. So again, as I mentioned earlier on, this gives us great confidence that our molecule is doing what we want it to do, what we expect it to do, and it could play a significant role in the prevention and, as I say, treatment of cytokine release syndrome. And again, the world kind of opens up now as to where we can put this drug, particularly in the immuno-oncology space. So as I say, the data strengthens and facilitates the expansion of our patent applications, which again, critical for this industry, in the cancer immunotherapy space. So very excited about the direction that we're taking right now. So appreciate your time. I will pass you on to Martin. Again, Martin's been a fantastic collaborator with us. He's worked very closely with Dave, looking at the clinical, analysis, clinical applications, giving us guides on commercial applications as well. So Martin, I'll pass across to you and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thanks. Yes, I'm very happy to present here as a clinician. I'm a hematologist, hemato-oncologist at the Royal Marsden Hospital and the Institute of Cancer Research. I value myself as very happy that I have been active in this field in a time where there has been so much progress. I'm working specifically on multiple myeloma, one of the uncommon cancers where I think there has been, relative to patient numbers, as many new mechanisms of treatment and as many new drugs licensed as in hardly any other oncological indication. I am a clinical trialist, both on the academic and the industry side, and I think it's a pleasure to work on so many trials where there is really progress is being made, a new progress, not only on a treatment side, but also on a symptom mitigation side, as we are speaking here today. And in my policy roles, I'm also having a very clear view on what implications sometimes relatively small changes in terms of the management, especially of side effects, can make in terms of patient having access in different healthcare systems, but also in different reach systems in terms of reaching patients that are living potentially in rural or remote areas, and they can make a huge difference to the benefit that we make to patients with our treatments. So speaking about that, I've been working in a field that is really been at the forefront of developments. I think what we have been blessed in hematology with is that we have been working and developing a lot of treatments that are really leveraging T cell and immune system activity against the tumor cells. And that is reflected in the number of CAR T cell therapies that are now licensed and in everyday use across hemato-oncology. The B-cell malignancies at the moment leading, but of course there is a lot of other developments ongoing. And as we're seeing in my trust, for example, across the board developments in solid oncology, meaning that the patient numbers will only increase over time. And the same is to be said about the bispecific antibodies that have really, in my disease, multiple myeloma, taken, I think, the management of the disease by storm in terms of showing new response levels that we've not seen before, which we will go into in more detail. But all of these drugs, and that's not only limited to hemato-oncology, that is also true in where we are seeing them used in solid oncology, are leading to CRS, cytokine release syndrome. And you can see listed here on the bottom 3 drugs that are currently available, but they all come with their downsides of either being intravenous drugs or not being completely efficacious in terms of mitigating side effects or even causing other side effects. That does open an unmet need in this field to really facilitate the delivery of all of these new immune therapies that are coming our way, both in hematology and solid oncology. Now, giving a bit of background, what is cytokine release syndrome? I'm, of course, very familiar with it because I see it on a day-to-day basis, but it is a side effect that is very common with these new immunotherapies, specifically these immunotherapies that are using T cells to attack the cancer cells, either through a bispecific antibody or by modifying the T cells into genetically modified CAR T cells. And it is a severe inflammatory response, which effectively has to do with that we're leveraging a very effective part of the immune system. The primary purpose of which is to cause an inflammation to fight infection. But this time, of course, we're artificially triggering it by directing these cells against the tumor cells. And in some sense, a lot of these symptoms in the early stages mitigate what we see in an infection. As you can see on the right-hand side is fever, heart rate, hypoxia, sometimes hypertension. That's the typical type of picture that we get in simple to severe infections. But because it is not an infection and certain stopping mechanisms that normally stop an infection are not in place here, these symptoms can really progress to a broad range of really severe symptoms that can affect quite a number of organ systems, including neurotoxicity in form of ICANS that's often linked with a cytokine release syndrome, so effectively a state where people can get seizures or a reduced cognition or awareness, actually, that can really be very serious to manage and to reverse as well. So as with many of these conditions, you ideally want to prevent it entirely, or you at least want to stop such a condition in the early stages, because it is normally a cascade, a thing that is actually like a chain reaction that increases if not mitigated early on. Now, why does this play a role, and why is it something that we are wanting in some sense to stimulate, although we need to mitigate it at the same time, is because it is part probably of the positive effects that we're seeing with these new treatments that are unprecedented, really. This year is one of the treatments that has already got a license for multiple myeloma, bispecific antibody called teclistamab, which is really effectively giving T cells new eyes, guiding them to the bone marrow to attack the myeloma cells, as many of you will be aware of. And the response rates that we're seeing here with the single agent drug in multiple myeloma, we have a lot of active drugs, but we normally need to combine them in 3 or 4 drug combinations to reach over response rates, as we see with this drug here, of over 60%. And this is actually already in patients that are refractory to get against everything else. And we're seeing already in early lines of treatment, the efficacy of these drugs even being better. But inherently, the efficacy of these drugs is linked to cytokine release syndrome, as you see on the right-hand side. It is we are really redirecting a very powerful part of our immune system, and 70% of patients do develop a CRS. Fortunately, with the bispecifics, these are mostly low-grade CRS, but they're nevertheless meaning that we need to be prepared to mitigate and to treat them, and that is actually what we're coming to in some of the next slides, bringing up challenges logistically. Now, one of the thoughts that has already been going into with the currently available drugs, the ones that I showed you on the slide before, one of them being tocilizumab, an anti-interleukin 6 antibody that was originally developed for rheumatoid arthritis and similar inflammatory conditions, but is now being used here reactively quite well, was if we give these up front, so if we give a drug like tocilizumab as a preventative, can we actually completely abrogate cytokine release syndrome? And this is from another study, again, conducted in multiple myeloma with a different bispecific antibody that has a similar high incidence of cytokine release syndrome, again, similar distribution of grade 1 and grade 2, so less severe or more severe CRS. And here the drug, the existing currently standard of care tocilizumab cytokine release treatment was given as a prophylactic, so beforehand, and the hope was, of course, that with that CRS would be completely non-existent, but that's not true. So we still see 40% of patients develop a CRS, and we do still see about the same proportion of patients developing a medium grade, and even some patients developing higher grade CRS. So there's clearly, despite this encouraging signs that we can do something about it, not currently a treatment that would really be giving us the confidence that we can manage this prophylactically. On the right-hand side, you see the very encouraging signal that came out of the study. However, regardless, is that the overall response rate does not seem to be affected at all by giving prophylactic tocilizumab. It might even be slightly higher, although I think that's a small study to make such a statement. Now, why is this having an impact on how we can manage patients? Well, most of these drugs that I've mentioned already, the mitigating drugs currently are IV drugs. So we can only give them really by having patients as inpatients while starting the T-cell engager or CAR T-cell therapy. And most of these drugs are given in a dose ramp-up phase, which means that patients have to stay in hospital for at least a set duration. And that's all fine if the patient does not develop any CRS. So this is kind of like the example of patient 1 that you can see here on the top. We can plan. It's still taking away resource, of course, if we have to have the patient in. And often it's just the fact that the prophylactic drug is not available as an oral drug that keeps the patient in the first place. So that's actually already a very important thing to reflect on. But then you can see with patient 2 and patient 3 what happens with that inpatient stay if the patient does indeed develop cytokine release syndrome, because suddenly it's not only that we have to give the IV drug to mitigate or to reduce the symptoms of the cytokine release syndrome, but the stay of the patient in the hospital is getting extended as well, because we need to make sure that there is no recurrence with the next dose, and that the patient does not need tocilizumab, for example, or even some of the other drugs that we have in the repertoire later down the line. Which means in the worst of circumstances, you can have inpatient stay that are more than tripling in duration to what you were originally planning. And that makes, of course, inpatient planning reach, especially in smaller hospitals, the potential in smaller hospitals to deliver these treatments or in the community really, really challenging. So I think in summary, and this is of course where the excitement comes from, with an oral management, potential oral management of cytokine release syndrome, as we are now seeing the first signs here with POLB 001, is that CRS is as such a serious condition, and at the moment we need to use quite a lot of healthcare resource to manage this because of the drugs that we have to give needing qualified medical personnel to give an IV infusion, but there is still a remaining mortality risk per se. There is still not a complete abrogation of cytokine release syndrome. We do know there's a rapid growth of these drugs. This problem will, and we're already seeing it in my trust, definitely in solid oncology, with the first bispecifics in lung cancer approaching. We're seeing this becoming a universal problem. So at the moment, that limits really the delivery of these immunotherapies to cancer specialist centers. And it's quite interesting, particularly in large markets like the US. It still often comes with a pre-registering even for academic centers to be able to deliver these drugs, really limiting their reach at the moment. And this is all linked to really that all of this can be managed in a hospital setting. So really an oral therapy that could prevent the CRS or even just treat the CRS by the patient at home would be highly, highly beneficial to patients, healthcare systems, and really, I think, have a big impact on reach and access to such treatments. Thank you for your attention.
That's great, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, where you may be based, everybody. Dave Ormond, Chief Business Officer. I just want to now take you through a few final slides around the unmet need and the market opportunity. And thanks, Jeremy and Martin, for lining this up. But just to underline the point, I think that Martin eloquently made is we are talking here about a very high frequency of CRS occurring overall, whether it's grade 1 or above, but it can be 70 to 95% of these patients. And therefore, I think the underlining point I take away from Martin's presentation is even the lower grades can be problematic in terms of efficient, broader delivery of these breakthrough therapeutics. So the severe cases, they're rare, but they can occur. And so as we've now developed additional data, I'll remind you in a second around the LPS challenge study we completed ahead of ASH and presented at ASH. But along with the additional preclinical data, we feel now we're in a very strong position to advance into phase 2, really looking at this oral product as a preventative measure for CRS to be an enabler to the broader use of bispecific immunotherapies. So coming back to the LPS study, Jeremy today in his presentation highlighted some new data generated in mouse models, which again showed us this dose-dependent reduction in key pro-inflammatory cytokines, dampening their effect but not ablating immune function. The LPS study was the first in human phase 1 normal volunteer study we ran in the lead up to ASH and had accepted at ASH. And I'll show you the abstract as a reminder, but really also showed that as a reminder for everyone, it had a very clean safety profile. So an oral therapy with clean safety profile, clear reductions in the key inflammatory markers, but not ablation. So we were not destroying immune function that is key in these sensitive patients, but really stopping hyperinflammation, which is what, in fact, CRS is. We had a very clear demonstration of the on-target inhibition, therefore confirmed, and it was a dose-dependent relationship. And actually, that was submitted to ASH. Next slide. So we attended ASH, as Jeremy said, just prior to JP Morgan, had some very positive interactions with the key opinion leader community, research community, and the pharma industry with these evolving data. So going forward, it is our focus with POLB 001. We of course have a great opportunity in severe influenza, but really our priority is in the cancer space going forward, both with our own investments that we continue to make, but also seeking partners to drive the program forward. It depends what you read if you want to be specific about numbers of overall market opportunity, and I've chosen, I think, what one or couple of sources that give us an indication. The way I think about immunotherapies in cancer, and Martin alluded to this in his talk, really it's not just about hematological malignancies. It's going to be about solid tumors, and it will also be about immune inflammatory diseases in the future. And if we just look at bispecific antibody and CAR T therapies in the cancer space, there are estimates, they range, but here we're talking a $100 billion market as we get into the 2030s. And probably 80% of that will be bispecifics. As you may be aware, CAR Ts offer great promise for patients, but autologous CAR T is somewhat limited in its breadth of application ex-US. But the bispecifics are becoming gradually more ubiquitous, more ubiquitously adopted worldwide. And this estimate is therefore the 80-20, that they will be a major factor in the future of cancer care, as we saw in the past, if you remember the curves around monoclonal antibodies on a similar trajectory. This burgeoning growth is exponential. So from our own perspective, as we think about the target product profile for POLB 001 as a preventative measure for CRS induced by cancer immunotherapies, taking a relatively conservative view, just looking at 3 hematological malignancies in third line plus, so later lines of therapy. As Martin said, these treatments are moving up the lines, but we've stuck to third line plus populations with a growth over time. We've estimated that this market opportunity is greater than $1 billion US dollars if POLB 001 could hit its profile, and that would exclude any expansion into the solid tumor space or immune inflammatory disease, which would make this a significant upside beyond the 1 billion. So I think the takeaway from this is, regardless of the specific numbers of the overall market and of this specific number, this is a huge opportunity. And we are very encouraged with our early data to prioritize this asset going forward. And it goes without saying, really, that when we create, do our internal strategizing and hypothesizing, that's fantastic. And we need a vision, we need a strategy, but we must go to the outside world. Including Martin, but a range of top international key opinion leaders from the UK, from France, from the US, and from Canada. A couple of the key opinion leaders mentioned here, Martin, we've met today, Professor Morgan in the US, a whole range of other physicians, some key payers and clinical trials experts in the cancer space. And we are confident now that we have confirmed, as we've described today, the unmet need here is clear. There are interventions available, but they will not fully solve the problem, either because they're IV or not completely abrogating CRS risk, but also because there are licensing issues. So, some of these therapies are not licensed for such uses because they were actually developed for other purposes. So there is a very clear need for a new oral therapeutic and or prophylactic to assist or enable the broader delivery of bispecific therapies in cancer, and perhaps CAR T therapies in cancer also in the future. So we're very grateful to the input from our experts around the world to confirm that opportunity. And in summary, we now feel that we've got a growing and comprehensive preclinical and initial clinical data package from the phase 1 LPS study. We're now in a phase 2 design, phase 2 ready situation. We have absolutely confirmed the CRS opportunity, and we've seen this clean profile from a safety perspective, and the dose-dependent reductions in hyperinflammation in all of the preclinical and the clinical study that we've run. We've taken international key opinion leader advice on this and confirmed some of the thinking here is on target, is on track, and we see a major market opportunity. So yes, we continue to invest on our side, but we are really also seeking pharma partners. We've been looking at that at ASH, been continuing those discussions at JPM, and we'll continue to do so as a priority going forward. But thanks so much for your time, and perhaps, Jeremy, we could open up for some Q&A.
Perfect. Let me just jump in at this point and just thank you all for the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab, which is situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to read those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Jeremy, as you can see, we have received a number of questions throughout today's presentation, and if I could just hand over to you just to read out those questions and provide a response where it's appropriate to do so, I'll pick up from you at the end.
No, happy to do that. And firstly, thanks to Martin and Dave for going through that. I hope those listening kind of appreciate the excitement. The fact that we've opened up, I think, a new opportunity here. We've kind of seized on the opportunity of these cancer immunotherapies, bispecifics in particular. There are even tri-specifics out there. Had good discussions at JP Morgan, but they realize that CRS is an issue. Yes, they're oncology drugs, their immuno-oncology drugs are efficacious, but they could be safer. So I think that's where POOLBEG comes in, and we have a nice niche to exploit now from the data we've generated and the IP that we've filed. So I appreciate Martin and Dave's time for going through their perspectives. So yes, appreciate the questions coming in. So what we'll do is I'll read out these questions, direct them to either myself, to Dave or to Martin, and we'll take it from there. And we'll go through as I say, 4 or 5 questions or so. Again, appreciate people's time this evening. From Niall P, what was the investor sentiment like at JP Morgan conference? Both POOLBEG specific and general market mood. I think that's a really good question because we've been in the kind of the doldrums a little bit over the previous 2 years, but there was a little bit of a rush towards the end of the year where, number one, the XBI, the kind of biotech index from NASDAQ, increased. I think it was something like 40, let me get this right, 48% or so between the November 1st and the start of JP Morgan. So the sentiment of biotech has improved, which is really good. And I think that's mainly on the back of big pharma getting back into the M&A, the mergers and acquisition buyouts. Some significant, companies, deals were done towards the end of the year. So I think, biotech in particular, particularly private biotech, is a cycle where VCs invest. Biotech or pharma companies buy their companies and then they reinvest in other biotech. So it's a cycle. So that cycle had been broken for a little while, but now it's picking up again. So the sentiment, I think, was quite buoyant, and I think there's optimism certainly for 2024 that trend will continue. But again, from a POOLBEG specific standpoint, to Dave's point, we've been discussing at various meetings all through the year about our ambitions and our strategies. But it was a nice, I think, time gap between the early December discussions at ASH, where primarily clinicians are in the room talking about POLB 001, and then a month or so later, we're at JP Morgan, where the business development teams were talking about. So it was a nice kind of laying the groundwork to carry on the conversation with different groups. But I think there was a lot, I will say there was a lot of nodding in the room when I was talking and I was presenting, showing them our data, our strategy, our ambitions, and they see the CRS issue. So they see this as kind of something that they need to fix. Because if you look at various pharma's pipelines, and maybe we'll do another presentation on that, but bispecifics, trispecifics, CAR-Ts are populated throughout a lot of big pharma. So they know this is an issue and they know it needs to be resolved. They do rely on tocilizumab before this, but when they see that there's a small molecule that can be given like primary prophylactic, given in advance of treatment to block CRS before it starts, there's a lot of nodding. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about what we're doing. And as I say, those discussions will continue at base. Thank you, Niall, for that question. Nathan, is there scope for accelerated route to use in clinic via FDA breakthrough status based on historic data for 001 under its previous use case for rheumatoid arthritis and similar for chronic inflammation? I'd say kind of yes, but from a different reason. I think that there is a significant unmet need. We're looking at this even from an orphan drug standpoint. There is, we have a terrific regulatory colleague, Bruno Spieder, working with here, who's having those dialogues with the EMA and FDA and kind of moving things forward like that, where we're kind of on the ball when it comes to getting this moving as quickly as possible. And I'd say running that, as Dave's point, in parallel with our own clinical ambitions and our partnering ambitions. And obviously, when we speak with pharma, we can talk about what our regulatory path is looking like. So that's something, yes, we're definitely pursuing there. Nathan had a second question. Don't be greedy now, Nathan. Any applications for patent allowance for sepsis use case for 001? Really good question. I mean, sepsis is very challenging as a disease, as an indication. The use of 001 in sepsis, there's a potential possibility. I think from an IP or patent your protection standpoint, that may already be out there, so there might be prior art in that space. But I think from an indication, from a disease standpoint, I think Dave spoke to this. Like the oncology direction is a significant market. So as happens a lot of drugs, go into something where you have a better chance of success and then expand from there. So there could be some, as I say, from an IP standpoint, we'll have to look into that a bit deeper. But getting success, getting efficacy in one indication, we can branch out from there. But certainly sepsis is somewhere where it's a tricky disease to go after, but huge unmet need, without question. Thank you for that, Nathan. Robin, seems like all these questions are for me. Maybe I'll try and find one. Would it be fair to say that the cancer indication is now the central focus of BD activity for POLB 001? I think Dave did speak to this. I'll take this, Dave. I'll take this. Oh, no, if you want to,
I can take it.
You can carry on.
I'll take it.
Go.
Yeah, Robin. Yes is the answer. We in any asset you're developing where you have, or every company has limited resources, both people and money, you pick your horses, right? I hope, from what we've shared with you today, our primary excitement is in the cancer immunotherapy space as an enabler to safer, broader use of these amazing therapeutics. We've got the key opinion leader input. We see a huge opportunity, and we've got some great data on the asset. It doesn't mean, to Jeremy's earlier point, that we're uninterested in severe influenza or another life cycle indication. If we have the IP and if we had the collateral to then go into life cycle opportunities, we would certainly love to be in that position. But the answer is yes. It is our priority now, given the amount of work we've done to uncover the opportunity and work with stakeholders in the space.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. I think that leads nicely to a question James has posed. James C. Will POLB 001 be sold or partnered separately for cancer and respiratory treatments, or would it be sold partnered as one drug with multiple uses? And we've talked about that before. We've discussed internally that there is the possibility. Now, pharma prefer to take one drug and do what they want with it. That helps them with their, as I say, their life cycle management, their regulatory paths, etc. But I've seen deals in the past where the same drug, one may be given intravenously, which we believe 001 would be applicable for severe influenza. But then on the other hand, for CRS in particular, that'll be an orally delivered drug. So you can kind of carve things up in that regard. But ideally, I think from a pharma standpoint, from a POOLBEG, if the one company took the drug and then developed it in multiple indications, I think that's where I think the world would be better off for all concerned.
And do you want me to take the regulatory question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, Robin. Yes. So, with all these things, I'll put a caveat around it. Of course, we would see.
Can you read it out first, Dave?
Yeah. So the question is, would it be possible to design a regulatory trial of POLB 001 for CRS? Would it be sufficient to show reduction in the rate of severity of CRS, or would there have to be a survival endpoint? So the answer, at least from the company perspective, is yes. We believe it would be possible to design a study to demonstrate efficacy on reduction of overall rates of CRS and certain grades of CRS. So we'd have to set the parameters and size the study appropriately to show beyond statistical doubt that we could achieve what would be clinically meaningful reductions overall and of severe forms of CRS, with secondary endpoints which would probably be more related to healthcare resource utilization, hospitalization, the use of other interventions, and to manage these patients who will end up staying in hospital for longer. So I don't believe that you would need a survival endpoint. However, I do believe that one would need to further study and confirm that there is no negative impact on the therapeutics. We have very strong preclinical rationale for why that would not be the case. And in fact, in CAR T, there is a potential that it could be an enhancement to CAR T quality, but that needs to be looked at. So I think you make a good point in your question, that I think it's less about a survival trial, but it's certainly more about absolutely ensuring you've got at least neutrality on the efficacy of the therapeutic, but absolutely managing the risk of CRS down to a level that clinicians like Martin would say that is clinically meaningful. And we would take regulatory advice, obviously, with the FDA and the EMA to confirm our thinking. If we get orphan status on this, which we will consider going forward, I would love that to be one pivotal trial, as we can get for products for rarer conditions. But that's work we're undertaking.
Yeah, good discussions. Thanks for that, Dave. We'll just take a couple of more. I think Sparky, again, appreciate Sparky. He's on these calls regularly and comes up with really good questions. It's a long one, so bear with me. Hi, Jeremy. Well done on progress so far. We keep hearing of near-term revenue generating. Where is it going to come from? Is it all partnering, which we don't seem to be beating big pharma away from the door at the moment? Are we looking for the right deal and being offered lower amounts, or have we had any offers? One would think from a PR from 001, the prospective partner would be afraid to miss out. There's a lot to take in there. There's a lot to take in there. I won't do one by one. I'll just say generally, obviously, we don't, or we're not allowed to talk about the stage of discussions with pharma. But I will say again, I reiterate what I said earlier on. We've talked to all the big pharmas. I spent 16,000 steps a day around San Francisco, going from hotel to hotel, up floors and down floors. Again, sharing the data, sharing the information. There is genuine interest, I think, when they see our solution. I did talk about tocilizumab, which accidentally, this is a Roche drug. It's an antibody, has to be given infusion, to manage CRS. It fell into their laps in that when CRS was being developed by these relatively new drugs, this was out there and it's used. But they see that what would be better is a small molecule. What would be better is orally delivered and then take it from home. So where we can check all those boxes. Interestingly, and maybe it's questions alluding to, is that from a Roche standpoint, everyone is using their drug, even though a different company owns the bispecific that causes the CRS. So we can see the same situation here, where every company uses our drug. And I think where you build up that competitive tension is where they see that we could answer a solution for one pharma's particular bispecific, but we could use they could use our drug for everybody else's. So they're kind of cornering a bit of a market there. So I think that happy with discussions, happy with the level of engagement, and obviously we kind of go up the ladders from there.
Jeremy, could I just add
please,
to that?
Yeah, please.
So if I'm reading the question correctly, excuse my interpretation, I'm also seeing a general question there about M&A activity beyond the POLB 001 that Jeremy has described as as where we have interest from a range of partners, both clinical and pharma industry. But from an M&A perspective, I think Jeremy described when he opened up today, it is a corporate priority to move towards revenue generation. And therefore, we're very active in a bunch of discussions now where we're looking for, in the more or less in the rare and orphan space, where you see high unmet medical need, meaningful assets, often alone or with limited competition, and where you see narrow customer base because they're specialized, and often chronic therapy because these are often genetic diseases. Yeah. And you might say, well, how are you going to find one of those? Well, we see quite a lot right now because, unfortunately, during the pandemic, companies didn't get fully out the gate and have found themselves in a tough capital position, or they have one asset and that's not really adequate from a portfolio point of view. So can you get a gestalt of 1 + 1 = 3? So we are now, if I was to describe, if I'm talking for our chairman now, Carl Friel, but if I was to describe probably top 2 priorities, it's look for revenue generating opportunity with a meaningful asset in a high unmet medical need, probably rare orphan disease. That could be global or US. And then secondly, POLB 001. There are other things we're doing, but I just really wanted to underline that.
Good point, Dave. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I know Martin has a hard stop at 6:45. I will take one last question. It's for me, Martin, so you're going to be up. But it's a short one, so we'll kind of wrap up as that. But it says, will pending patents hold back potential deals with pharma? Good question, and the short answer is no. I think farmers know that sometimes they like to get into the pending patent and shape it themselves. But I've done deals in the past where you have a pending patent. Once you get that first patent in, obviously you kind of negotiate for the grant. But I think you're on the start line, before everybody else, and you've got the head start, as it were. So listen, let's wrap it up there. Again, appreciate everybody's time. Our first IMC of the year. Thanks everybody for attending. There'll be many more to come as we make our progress. And again, appreciate the lots of questions and the support for the company. And as I say, exciting year ahead. 2023 was busy, exciting, and 2024 looks like it's going to be pretty much the same. So thanks everybody for attending, and thanks again, David and Martin. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everybody. Good luck.
Perfect. Jeremy, David, Martin, thank you very much for updating attendees today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of POOLBEG Pharma PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good evening to you all.
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.